Hello and welcome back to a new edition of Vaughan and Vivo. You and me together, the two of us, once again, una vez más, once again, we're together. And once again, we have a job to do in common, un esfuerzo en común. I will make an effort to teach you the best I can, and I expect you to make an effort to do the best you can. And if we come together in a happy meeting, in our mutual efforts, we will make magic. Okay? I know how to make magic when I have the right students. If I don't have the right students, I can't make magic to save my life. So, it's like making love. You can't make love if you don't have a partner, and I can't make magic if I don't have a student. But it's my students' work that produces the magic, not my teaching. My teaching motivates you, but if you don't work, no magic takes place. Okay, number one, yo no entendía al taxista. I didn't understand the taxi driver. I couldn't believe it. I flew to New York City. I was flying on an airplane. Okay, trains and boats and planes. But in this case, I used a plane. I flew to New York, first class. It was surprising. It was incredible. I never fly first class. I never fly business class. I always fly economy class. And of course, in economy class, you're very cramped. Cramped. Cramp is como un calambre. Oh, my God, a calambre. But to be cramped is to be without any space to move. But I went to the airport. I went to the airport. And I didn't get to the airport early or late. I got to the airport at a normal time. And I had to wait in a long line for about 25 or 30 minutes to reach the check-in counter. And I had my passport, my plane ticket, everything. But I was relatively well dressed. I was not dressed in a sloppy, desalineado, sloppy way. Sloppy. I wasn't sloppy. I wasn't wearing a suit, but I was dressed nicely. Okay? And the lady behind the counter was a very pleasant lady, and I smiled, and we chatted, a little bit of humor, etc. And she checked the passport, the ticket. She looked at the seating, and she looked up at me and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Vaughan, do you mind if I put you in first class for this flight?" I said, "No." "Why?" She says, "We're overbooked. And a few people from the economy class, we have too many people in economy, and so we are going to move a few people to business class, first class, and to ambassador class." Okay? And I said, "First class?" And she said, "Well, to tell you the truth, a decir verdad, do you mind if I move you to ambassador class?" Now, let me tell you, this is a true story, by the way. I'm not lying to you. I'm not telling you a tall tale. Escrito tale. Un alto cuento is, in English, is un cuento chino, okay? The poor Chinese, they get all, okay? A tall tale. The ambassador class on the Boeing 747, the big jumbo jet, has 2 sections, sometimes 3. They have three sections and sometimes 4. They have the economy section, which all of us know. You know, I always travel economy. Business class, which is nice. First class, which is, wow, very nice. And then at the top, that little section at the top of the Boeing, La Chepa esa, the Boeing 747, that area, in some of the planes, is the ambassador class, and it is outstanding. Outstanding. Sobresaliente. Fuera de todo, fuera de sí, it's incredible. And the lady said to me, "Would you mind if I moved you to first class?" I said, "No." "Well, in fact, it's ambassador class. Would you mind?" And I said, "No." "Why?" And she said, "Because our economy class is overbooked. And we have several places available in business class, first class, an economy class, and we need to move about 10 people from economy to the other classes. Would you mind, ambassador class? I said, no. I rubbed my hands together and said, wow, what luck. And I said, why me? And she said, don't tell anybody, but you see, when this happens, we have instructions to check out. Check out is verificar, comprobar la persona, mirarla de arriba, to check the people out. Check them out. And if the person looks like a type of person who would, from time to time, buy a first-class ticket or an ambassador ticket, then we suggest to them. And also if the person is pleasant and nice and well-mannered, then we get... So, let me give you some advice. This happens from time to time. If you fly often, it's worth it, vale la pena, it's worth it to be nice, to dress relatively well, because you never know. If you travel, for example, 10 times a year, once every 2 or 3 years, you can be bumped up to a better category. And I flew ambassador class, and it was a very pleasant flight, by the way. And when I got to the airport, we landed at Kennedy Airport. I got my luggage. I walked out of the terminal to look for a taxi. And there was one taxi. And I was surprised that there weren't any other people, so I said, are you free? He said, And he got out of the taxi, walked around to the back of the taxi, opened the trunk, or the boot. Los británicos y irlandeses dicen boot, como bota, de llevar botas. Boot. He opened the trunk, and he put my luggage in the trunk. He got back into the driver's seat. I got into the back seat. I got into the back seat. He turned and he said, where to? And I said, 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. And he, without saying anything, he started. But during the trip, I asked him a question. I asked him a question. I asked him a question. And he answered. And I didn't understand him. And I said, where are you from? He said, I'm from Somalia. Okay. Mogadishu. And I said, wow, okay. And he was from Somalia. And I had trouble understanding him. Me costaba trabajo entenderle. I had trouble understanding him. Are you having trouble understanding me? Are you have trouble seeing me on the television? Sometimes in TDT, the screen moves and you have trouble making out what I'm saying, divisando, percibiendo. You have trouble. And sometimes I have trouble lifting. This microphone is heavy. And if I use my right arm, I have trouble lifting it because my elbow is hurting. Okay, my elbow hurts. So I have trouble. To have trouble, escrito trouble, más el gerundio. To have trouble writing, to have trouble seeing, to have trouble lifting, to have trouble getting up, to have trouble walking. Ando con cojera. I'm walking with a limp. I have trouble walking, okay? Es la forma en inglés de decir costar trabajo. Me cuesta trabajo llegar al final de esta clase sin perder el hilo. I have trouble getting to the end of this class without losing my train of thought. To lose my train of thought. Perder mi tren de pensamiento. Es perder el hilo. Sometimes I go off on a tangent and I need to come back to my starting point, punto de partida, starting point, and I don't remember my starting point. But usually my viewers don't realize it. I realize it, but you don't, okay? So, getting back to my story of New York, I didn't understand the taxi driver. So don't worry if you go to New York. Many of the taxi drivers are foreigners. But he took me to the hotel. He took me to 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. I got out of the car. He got out of the car. He opened the trunk. He took out my luggage. He put it on the ground. And he said, $44, please. And I gave him $50. I gave him a 50, lo cual significa I gave him a $50 bill, which means I gave him about a 12 or 13% tip, which is very common. To leave a tip, or at the restaurants, of course, but to give the taxi driver a tip is very common, and it's expected in New York City. And then I picked up my luggage, my 2 bags, and I walked up the steps to the hotel. The doorman opened the door for me. I walked into the hotel, and I walked up to the front desk. I walked up to. Así hablamos los nativos. Si no nos entendéis, lo siento, porque enlazamos palabras igual que vosotros en castellano. Decís tira para adelante, no decís nunca para adelante. Vente para acá, voy para acá, para acá, para allá. And so os coméis letras y sílabas también. We do the same in English, pero la conectividad inglesa es el secreto de entender. I walked up to. I walked up to. Me acerqué a pie, andando, a recepción. I walked up to the front desk. La clave es up. Podríamos quitar up. I walked to the front desk. O sea, anduve a recepción. O sea, hasta recepción. Pero no lo decís. Caminé hasta recepción. Ahora, me acerqué. I walked up to. Añado el up. Cuando añades el up, es cuando te da la idea de acercamiento. Se va acercando. Okay? Now, if the hotel had been flooded, if the hotel had been flooded with water, 1 meter or 2 meters, if there had been, I'm 1.80 meters, if there had been 1.5 meters of water, that means the water up to here, up to my chest. If there had been a flood in the hotel, si hubiera estado inundado, if the hotel lobby, the vestibule, if the hotel lobby had been flooded, I wouldn't have been able to walk up to the front desk. I would have needed to swim up to the front desk, acercarme a nado. Pero otra vez inserto up, to swim up to. If the hotel had been normal, but I had been in a big hurry, I wouldn't have walked up to the front desk. I would have ran up to the front desk. Estoy usando el pasado de condicional a la vez que os enseño up, como acercarse a mediante diferentes modos de locomoción. El verbo de locomoción en inglés es clave porque lo usamos mucho. Donde vosotros usáis ir o venir, más el gerundio para la forma de locomoción, fui andando, fui en avión, fui en tren, vine en avión, vine a nado, vine a rasta o a gatas, okay? Usando ir y venir, we say anduve hasta, caminé hasta, nadé hasta, okay? I swam. For example, yesterday I didn't fly to Zaragoza, I swam to Zaragoza. I crawled to Zaragoza. I flew to Zaragoza. We almost always use the type of travel verb, the movement verb in question. Y si es acercarse, me acerqué al Señor, andando se entiende. I walked up to the man. Me acerqué al policía. I walked up to the policeman. Me acerqué corriendo al policía. I ran up to the policeman. Me acerqué al policía a rastras, a gatas. I crawled up to the policeman. Y arrastrándome, I dragged myself up to the policeman. Me acerqué a nado al policía. I swam up to the policeman. Me acerqué en mi coche al policía. I drove up to the policeman. Okay. And in this case, when I went into the hotel with my bags, I didn't run up to the front desk. I walked up to the front desk. And I gave them my passport and I said, good afternoon. I believe you have a reservation under the name of Vaughan. And they said, well, excuse me, Mr. Vaughan, let me check. Let me check. And they checked and said, Yes, we have a reservation for Mr. Vaughan. That's 2 nights. Is that correct? I said, yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. We have you in a non-smoking room. Is that correct? Yes, that's right. Okay, Mr. Vaughan, well, please, can you fill out this little form and sign at the bottom? And I began to fill it out. Okay. And so I checked into the hotel. How long did it take me to check into the hotel? Well, it took me only about 5 minutes to check into the hotel. And then a bellman took my luggage and escorted me up to the 7th floor and down the hall to room number 747, like the airplane I took. And so I spent two nights in a relatively nice hotel in the center of Manhattan in room 747, the same number as the airplane that I flew, 747, 747. And it was a very nice room. It had 2 double beds. I don't know why, but it had 2 double beds. But let me tell you, most of the hotels and motels in the United States have 2 double beds in the room. If you travel through the United States and go to any motel on the highway, often the room will have 2 double beds. If you're alone, you'd, wow, which bed should I sleep on? And if you're with another person, your wife or your husband, with your spouse, tu cónyuge, you say, well, I'll sleep on one and you sleep on the other. It's interesting. When you travel in the United States across the country, por la América Profunda, through deep America, for example, if you fly to New York, you rent a car, and you start driving through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, California. It takes 7 days to cross, or 6 days by car. It's a long distance. Most often you stay in motels along the highway, and they're quite good. And they're not expensive. They're about $60, about 50 euros a night. But the quality is good. It's like 4-star quality. And most of the rooms, if you're a married couple traveling together, you stop at a motel or a hotel, and you say, excuse me, do you have a room? I need a double for my wife and I. And they say, yes, sir, no problem. We have a double for you. Okay. And then when you go to the room, you have a dilemma with your wife. You say, there are 2 beds. Each one is approximately 1.35 meters. Okay, now, 1.35 meters is a double bed, cama de matrimonio, normal. But nowadays, in Spain and everywhere, you have beds that are 1.50 meters, 1.80 meters, and even 2 meters. King-size beds. You have queen-size bed and king-size bed. So the married couple says, well, listen, we can sleep together in one bed. It's 1.35. At home in Spain, we have a bed that's 1.80. And many times the couples decide one sleep on one bed and one on the other. So they have 2 double beds, and one sleeps on each one. All right, but getting back to New York, I spent 2 nights in New York because I wanted to attend a Broadway show. I wanted to attend a play that I had been, Bruscan Perfecto. I wanted to see a play on Broadway. Se dice on Broadway. Quería ver una obra de teatro en Broadway. I wanted to see a play on Broadway that I knew I would never see if I didn't go to New York. I had been, Bruscan Perfecto, continuo. Okay. I had been wanting to see that play for 4 or 5 years, and I was waiting for it to come to London, to the West End in London, because many of the successful plays and musicals in New York go to London, and vice versa. The famous musicals, for example, Cats, they start in London, and they go to New York, to Broadway. But this play didn't come to London, and I wanted to see it. And I wanted to see it before they took it off Broadway, because then I thought I would never have an opportunity to see it again. So I went to the airport in Madrid and I caught a plane to New York. I spent 2 nights in New York with the express purpose of seeing a Broadway play that lasts 2 hours. Yeah, why not? Okay, it's a little bit expensive to do that, of course, because the flight cost me it cost me about 700 euros. The 2 nights in the hotel cost me 200 euros, that's 900 euros. And then eating in the theater, my God, the ticket cost another 100 euros, it's expensive. And everything together, the entire trip cost me about 1,700 euros. Everything, to see one play. Of course, I took advantage of my time in New York to see a couple of museums, to visit Central Park again for the 10th time, to cross to Staten Island on the ferry and to see the Statue of Liberty in the Bay of New York, in the New York Harbor. All right, and I visited Brooklyn, a friend I have who lives in Brooklyn, so I took advantage of the time. But if the play hadn't been on Broadway, I wouldn't have flown to New York. Pasado condicional. If the play hadn't been on Broadway, I wouldn't have flown to New York. If the play had come to the West End in London, I would have flown to London. Okay? And I wanted to see the play. And do you know what happened? I fell asleep during the play. Can you believe it? I fell asleep during the play because I was suffering jet lag. When you fly, for example, from Spain to the United States, you cross 6 time zones. If it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon when you catch the plane in Madrid, for example, it's 8 o'clock in the morning in New York. Okay, it's earlier. And when you cross the Atlantic, you arrive in New York perhaps at 4 p.m. 2 hours later between Madrid time and New York time, but 7 or 8 hours later according to your time. So when you reach the hotel, and I remember I reached the hotel at about 5 o'clock, 5:30 in New York time. For me, it was 11:30 at night, Madrid time. So I was starting to get a bit sleepy, but it was only 5:30 in the afternoon. Okay. I went out to have dinner, and then I watched TV a little in the hotel room, and I fell asleep. But I fell asleep at about 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, okay, which was about 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, Madrid time. I woke up completely awake at 3:30 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, New York time, which was 10:30 in the morning, Madrid time. And I went out onto the streets of Manhattan at night, still in the middle of the night. I found a place to eat something, a 24-hour-a-day shop and drugstore, and then the rest of the day. And at 7 o'clock, the play started. The play started at 7 p.m. Now, I still had jet lag from the flight, from the change of time. And at 7 p.m., it's 2 o'clock in the morning, Madrid time. So when I sat down in the theater to watch this play, in my biological clock, it was more or less 2 o'clock in the morning, Madrid time. And the play was very good. But my clock was saying it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's 2:30 in the morning, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and my eyelids were getting heavy. And I was fighting to stay awake. And even though the play was excellent, my body was saying sleep, 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 and I fell asleep. I woke up maybe 15 or 20 minutes later, and then it happened again. It happened 3 times during the play. The people sitting next to me must have thought I was crazy, and I fell asleep. So I have to go now for a break, but listen, if you go to New York, definitely go to Broadway. If you don't speak English well, go see a musical like The Phantom of the Opera, Cats, etc., or Grease, okay? It's fantastic. The quality is fantastic. But make sure that you have 20 coffees before going if you have just arrived from Europe. Okay? Simply a piece of advice. Un consejo. A piece of advice. No se dice en inglés, an advice. Se dice a piece of advice. And with that piece of advice, I will take a short break. I need to rest for a few minutes, but I'll be back in 5 minutes' time. So, see you soon.